This is a seriously strong and cheap mobile workbench. And you only need 2 power tools to build it. You don't need a fancy workshop and loads of tools. You'll be able to build this in half a day. I'll show you the full build, keep it simple and flag a few things that actually matter. And I'll show you one small detail near the end that makes this the best workbench you could ever build. Here's all the materials you need, nothing fancy. I've got some 4x2 timber and an 18mm sheet of plywood. And that is all we're gonna need to get this build done. I've gone with 4x2 timber because it's gonna be plenty strong enough for this build, and an 18mm top gives us a nice strong build. Now I'm gonna start with my bench top. I'm gonna cut that and I'm gonna build everything else around it. If we get this perfectly square, the rest will follow. My bench is gonna be 700mm wide, so I make a series of marks so that I can keep the top square when I cut it. 700mm will be perfect for my width. That's gonna give me a big enough wide workspace, but I need to decide on a length. I think for me, 1500mm, 1.5 meters in length, that's going to be perfect. So I'm going to mark this out now, then we can cut it. We've got a good factory cut edge on that side. All we need is a nice long straight edge to draw a line along our marked out side. So a nice thick line there that we can follow. Now for the first of our 2 power tools, the circular saw. We're just going to cut that top out along the line that we just made. We can get a nice accurate cut with a circular saw, and I didn't use a track saw because I want you guys to be able to follow along. If you're using a circular saw, cutting from the other side and using a good sharp blade, you should get a nice edge on it. But I'm going to use a bit of 180 grit sandpaper just to make it that little bit smoother, and I want to round the corners off. And we can do that not using a router. We don't need any fancy tools, just sandpaper. That's a nice finished top. We can start to build it up now. The rest of this ply we're going to use later in the build. So with the top cut, I just want to check it's nice and square. I've got a speed square. I'm just going to lay that along each side and just check that it's perfectly square, because we're going to build our frame to the top. The top dictates everything else. Now we'll flip it over and we'll work from the bottom. Now our framing timber is not going to come flush with the edges. We want a little detail around there. So I'll make a 20mm mark around every side. And using my pencil and a straight edge, I'll just draw a line all the way around, 20mm in from the edges. Now let's cut some nice straight 4x2s. The frame needs to be millimetre perfect. A nice quick way of doing that, line it up at the end, make a mark, and then extend it across. No miter saw is needed for this one. You do the same for the sides. You cut your side pieces and an extra one for the middle. Now we need to get the whole lot screwed together. So I'm going to make use of some clamps to hold everything because it'll help us keep it nice and accurate. And then 2 good quality 80mm screws for each corner. Get all the corners screwed together, get the frame clamped to the lines. You know it's nice and square then. And then we're going to pop a couple of 40mm screws dead in the corner. Pop them in a place where they're going to look nice, so they're even from either edge, because you are going to see these. Now we'll evenly space out a bunch more of them screws just to make sure the top is nice and secure to the frame. So that's our top. It looks smart and everything will be built around that. If you get the top right, the rest will follow. What we need to do now is work out the height. I think waist height is perfect. So let's take a measurement to the floor. I need to take into account my casters, which you'll see later in the video. They make this thing mobile. They're 80mm. So I'm gonna make this 880, and I'm gonna deduct the caster, which means I need legs of 800mm. But we don't want to just use 4x2s, we want 4x4s. And this is where keeping it simple really works, because guess what? 4x2s joined together, well, they make 4x4s. So let's cut 800mm lengths, and then I'll show you how to build the leg so it's super strong. For the legs, line them up, make sure they're perfect. You want to make sure these are absolutely millimetre perfect. And then 80mm screws again, the perfect depth for this job. You'll notice I've offset that. That's because the next one is going to be offset very slightly this way, and that'll stop the timber from twisting. If we put them all down the middle, the timber will be able to warp and move. Now you should have 4 identical legs that look a bit like this. So now you'll notice I've positioned the screws on the inside. Just looks neater. We don't want to see them with our finished product. These legs We're going to fix them in place through the frame. They're not going to be perfectly plumb, they're not going to be perfectly square. We'll do that bit later. For now, all we want to do is transfer the weight of the frame of the top through into the leg. But what we can see currently is the weight of anything we put on this bench will be transferred through the top onto the leg. We don't want that if we're using this for heavy applications. We need to raise this up so that we can get some fixings through the frame into the leg. Now this only needs to be around 1mm, so I'm just going to use a couple of window packers, but you can use anything, cardboard even. Then I'll use 4 100mm screws through the frame into the leg, 2 either side, and remove the packer. Now if we flip this over, this would already make a pretty strong bench, but we're not done there because we need to make a shelf under here, and then we need to make it mobile because that is the key to this build. And if you are enjoying the build, hit like for me and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next video. We now need to build a mid-level shelf. That's going to stop the legs from tilting in and make them nice and plumb so the whole thing sits nice and sits level. And it also allows you to store some tools underneath when you're working. I've just realised in the edit I've blocked your view, so all I'm doing is making a mark 400mm from the top of the bench. Now using that speed square again, simple tools again, and a Holofer's pencil, both which will be linked in the description, just square that line off across the leg. And then we'll take some inside measurements and cut some timbers for an internal frame. You can see I've just popped a clamp on there that helps me hold the piece of timber, and I've done that for both ends because it's really hard to hold it yourself. And then you want some longer screws to fix through. You can use 120 or 150mm screws. And to make this nice and strong, we'll use 2 screws per leg. Once all your sides are screwed together, they should look something like that. Now we have our 4 casters, but they're not just any old caster, and these are, well, they're going to be absolute game changers. You're going to see why. These actually have a ratcheting system in the foot, which will allow us to get a dead level bench wherever we use it, and they hold up to a ton of weight. You heard that right, 1 ton. Let's install them. Make sure the plate of the caster is centered to the leg. Orientation of the caster itself doesn't actually matter because they rotate 360. And then all we're going to do, 60mm screws to fix it to the leg. Now we're going to do this for all 4 legs before I flip this thing over and show you how strong it is. I'll link the casters in the description. I've used these casters before on loads of different jobs and they're awesome. So if you're going to build this bench, you'll want to pick these up. So let's lower them casters down now. Then I'll do exactly what I said at the start of the video, and I'll prove to you that it holds a ton of weight. I haven't got anything that weighs a ton, but I'll sit on it. I can now use my ratcheting system to lower the foot, which brings the wheel up off the ground, stops the bench from rolling around and makes it nice and strong and sturdy. Moment of truth, them casters are adjustable. We can level it if we need to. That is absolutely bang on. Right, I don't want to get my mucky work boots on here, but that, tell me if that is not strong enough. That is super strong. It holds a lot of weight. I promised you it would. Now I've cut a bit of my leftover plywood and I'm going to place that on the shelf and screw it in place. There's literally no flex in it either. It is absolutely solid. Here's a funny little outtake of my demonstration that went wrong. But what makes it genuinely useful is we can roll it and use it almost anywhere. A bit of an optional step is to varnish the top to stop any moisture getting into it and to stop it from getting filthy dirty if you're going to do a lot of oily or dirty work on the top of it. I'm using a clear varnish. If you do decide to do this, make sure that you apply it in the direction of the grain. So let me know, what would you change or add? I read all the comments. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you want to see more awesome builds, click one of these and I'll see you in the next one.